In this video, I will mention how the transition is carried out. It is a complex topic that I only intended for the online course, since the achievement of the necessary understanding and effectiveness requires the knowledge and connection of multiple skills, many skills and abilities, and also the ability to use them in a fluid and connected way. This obviously can't be achieved by a simple trick like the one I'm going to show you, because what I'm going to do in this video is to show you a trick that works very well and is about making the transition in a certain way and for a certain purpose that now I'm going to define for you. In the online course, we go very deeply into the ability to make the transition. We do it for stalking, for dreaming, for seeing, and for the relationship with the active side of infinity. However, I am convinced that the trick that I will show you in this video can still have its effectiveness, even if limited to something very specific, and even if not with the precision, depth and refinement that could be obtained when you have all that is needed at hand. What I am showing you in this video is a trick that can help you get into dreaming directly. Remember that the technique itself is just a ruse. It is a trick that, however, hooks onto very interesting things, and that gives me the opportunity to at least mention something about it. So, before moving on to the actual technique, I have to make some necessary introductory remarks. There are two main ways to approach dreaming: waking up in the dream or entering it directly. The first is what happens when we are already dreaming. We realize that we are dreaming and then the dream becomes lucid. But before that, it was a normal dream. On the other hand, entering the dream directly means that we are able to pass from the waking state to that of dreaming by crossing that barrier, that passage that makes us enter directly into dreaming in a conscious way, thus maintaining awareness. These are things that I have covered rather thoroughly in my books, and in which I will delve further. Obviously, the real control over dreaming requires many things. Here too, the connection with stalking, with the recapitulation, with intent. We can't go into all of these topics, but I can give you some advice that works well in my experience. First of all, let's clarify what it means to operate the transition. It can have many approaches and many results, but in essence it technically happens every time we perform a voluntary, conscious, purposeful movement of the assemblage point. And above all, we can follow the movement of the assemblage point without ever losing attention, with continuity. That way of gazing that I often explain in the meetings, in the online course, in the videos, the gazing with the continuous gaze, also serves to train us and stimulate us to maintain this continuity in the transitions from one position of the assemblage point to another. This gives you the idea of how everything is connected in nagualism. When we operate the transition, we follow this shift of the assemblage point from one position to another position, consciously and above all in a linear way. I assure you that this is not always the case. Indeed, most of the time the passage from one position to another remains unconscious. It happens as a kind of gap in which we lose the awareness of the actual transition. This makes a big difference. There are important reasons why transitioning the way I am now illustrating is very convenient. We can make the transition for seeing, for stalking, for dreaming, and for the relationship with intent. We will now deal with the transition for dreaming. When we operate it for dreaming, we resort to the second case, that is, we do not wake up in our dreaming, but we try to be able to maintain awareness of the movement, the assemblage point, as it shifts from the waking state to that of dreaming, to the new dreaming position. Then there are cases in which we could operate the transition also within a lucid dream, from an initial position in which, for instance, we wake up in the dream, become aware we are dreaming, and from this position we do the transition into another dreaming position. We operate the transition only if we keep the awareness of the whole route, of the entire journey. If you are practicing gazing, you have probably realized that often, as you are gazing, you tend to fall asleep, or you actually fall asleep. It's easy and normal for this to happen. It happens for a precise reason. Because as you are gazing, once you start accumulating a certain amount of inner silence, the assemblage point breaks loose from its habitual position and starts moving. We associate this shift to falling asleep. Because what we have been doing for our whole lifetime is, when going to sleep, to move away from the habitual position of the assemblage point. Basically, when we fall asleep, our assemblage point breaks loose from its habitual position and glides to new positions or just moves. More than stabilizing in other positions, it moves towards and through other positions. Therefore, we habitually associate the assemblage point movement, the fact that it moves, to falling asleep, and technically that's what actually happens. However, we can govern this movement also while gazing, and so use gazing to do the transition. And here we have infinite possibilities for directing this shift, and do the transition for many purposes. There are infinite nuances that correspond to directions and then positions for the assemblage point, which we can learn to recognize and use. In this case, we'll act differently, still using a form of gazing, but a particular one. Let's say we'll be gazing at the area of possibilities and the inner continuity flows. So we gaze at our energy flows as they change during the transition. What you need is a body position like the one you see I'm adopting. Therefore, comfortable enough, but not lying down, and with an object to hold in your hand. A stone is good, or even a piece of wood, something not too cumbersome, that adapts well to your hands, and then you can start gazing at what is in front of you, and when you become sleepy, close your eyes. From that moment on, we try accompanying the transition that has started when gazing at what we were looking at. Yet, we continue doing it with our eyes closed and thus falling asleep in the classical way we know. This object we hold in our hand is our key to accessing the possibility to operate the transition in this way. When I close my eyes and start relaxing the body, feeling the body falling asleep, going deeper, I have to do this. I have to start applying a very light repeated pressure on the object with my hands. This is not really a repeated pressure. It has to become pulsations that start from within us, from our continuity flows, from the area of possibilities, and that are released on the object we hold in our hand and then return back. It's like saying that the borderline, the point of contact between my hands and the object, becomes an area through which we govern the transition that we are operating. To do this, you need, first of all, to have learned to access the area of possibilities. This is essential to carry out this maneuver. It facilitates learning to remain motionless and extending the micro movements. However, the idea is that I exert a pressure on the object I keep in my hand, a pressure that has a constant rhythm, that is not really physical pressure. It starts like a very light physical pressure, but then, as my condition is changing, as I'm falling asleep, as the transition is occurring, I regulate the intensity of these pulsations on the object until it's no longer physical, but intended. When I get to this point, the physical confines between the object I'm holding and my hand should dissolve, blend. I could say that the object that I'm holding in my hand, even if it's a stone, becomes soft. It reacts to my intended pressure. When I issue this pulsation as a pressure from my center, from the center of the will, through the vibratory aspect, I transfer through my hands this pulsation to the object, this practically inexistent push, and in turn, I receive a pulsation in answer from the object. It's like an outward route and a return. Such return is distributed throughout my whole body. And eventually the object I hold in my hand and my body take up the same consistency, they lose the physical limits and both assume a more liquid, fluid consistency. That is the moment in which we begin gazing at the variation in the inner energy configuration. In this way, we lose our boundaries. When we lose the boundaries and start having the perception of ourselves as something elastic, fluid, that is moving and readjusting, we use this object we have in our hand, and that at this point is no longer solid. The feeling is to have in our hand something we can shape. In response to how we shape the object's answer modifies our inner configuration. At that point, we can use the way we are exerting this maneuverability on the object we are holding in our hand to direct the transition that we are operating. From this physical point, that becomes central, that is also the object directly connected to the will. From this center, we can start issuing images that help us access a lucid dream. One is sufficient. Actually, it must be only one. We give it time to form, then we use the connection between the will and the object. The maneuvering center that we are still holding in our hand, like an area that accumulates dreaming attention. When enough attention has gathered, we release this image that leads us into dreaming, that is formed in front of us, issuing from the relationship between the will and the object we are maneuvering. And this image becomes our portal, our gate, that allows us to enter dreaming directly. We wait for it to become stable. The image that is freed from the center has to reach depth, stability, and then we can finish operating the transition and entering into the new position, thus entering dreaming directly.